What's up, guys? You guys are in for a treat today because this is story time with the King of Thrift.
What we do here is go back.
Today, what I'm going to be talking about is basically the origin story behind the whole vintage shoe phenomenon. That's right, guys. I was there when, vintage sneakers were nothing. When it wasn't a thing. There was no such thing as a sneakerhead. There was no such thing as collectible sneakers, that's for sure. And basically, no one really, no one cared about old sneakers. They were literally being tossed and donated to the Salvation Armies, to the thrift centers, to the Goodwills, and, being sold at yard sales, and that's where they were going. So, basically, this is how it goes, guys. This is how it went down. Back around, I would say, 2002, 2003-ish, when I started this game, I actually got my start. I actually quit my full-time job, out there, as everyone says, in corporate America, to sell sneakers. That's right. At the time, I was selling, and I wasn't selling just sneakers. I was actually selling men's shoes, period. I also sold some women's shoes, but as far as women's shoes, as far as that goes, what I was selling at that time was women's cowboy boots. Specifically, I didn't really mess with women's shoes too much at all. Heels and pumps and slingbacks and mules and all that. I know all those guys. Yeah, I've been down that road. But I didn't really sell that. What I sold specifically, where I made my money, was vintage sneakers and specifically cowboy boots and men's dress shoes. And like I said, back then, I used to probably 90% of everything I picked up, I would pick up at what you guys call the bins now, the Goodwill bins. Back then, we called the $1 Goodwill, because back then it wasn't called the bins; it was called the clearance Goodwill Center. And what they sold were everything in there was $1. So hence the name, the Dollar Goodwill. And I would spend literally all day, up in the Dollar Goodwill, and getting shoes. And what they were doing is they were getting mainly the sneakers. They were only getting good sneakers. So back then they were picking up Asics gels and newer Nikes and Reeboks, and they would get all the sneakers and they were taking them to Mexico and they were selling them. However, they were leaving every single pair of old sneakers. That's right, guys, that no one wanted old sneakers. They were just old, worn out sneakers. So I would pick them up. They were only $1. Now, right before this whole vintage sneaker craze sort of started, one of my good friends, was he obviously knew that I had quit my job and he knew what I was doing. So, I basically enlightened him in the whole situation and told him what I was doing, and he decided to quit his job as well. He was actually a postman at the time, and he made pretty decent money. Had good benefits and all that. But, needless to say, he seen how well I was doing, and he decided to quit his job and do the same thing. And I was all for that. He was pretty much like, I guess, my first student, or the first person that I taught. And, there was plenty to go around. There were no resellers back then, and there were sure no sneaker resellers. Anyways, long story short, we were picking up basically all the old sneakers all over town. And they were out there. They were out there, guys. I mean, you would not believe. I mean, back then you could pick up a pair of Adidas Shell Toes. Then right around the corner you pick up a pair of Superstars. Pick up some old Air Force Ones, a pair of Nike Jordan 5s, 6s, 7s, 10s. I mean, you name it, they were out there. Stan Smiths. I mean, the list goes on. Air Huaraches. They were everywhere. And like I said, nobody wanted them. Well, what happened is right before we really sort of realized that these old sneakers were gold, so to speak, what happened was we got into a contest. And the contest was to see who could sell the most beat down pair of shoes. So, and at this time we weren't selling sneakers hardly. We were mainly still selling men's dress shoes and cowboy boots. So we got into this contest to see who could sell the most beat down pair of shoes. And that included sneakers. It didn't matter. Well, anyways, one night, he listed a pair, and he came back in, and we met up at the Dollar Goodwill as usual. And he said,
"Did you see what those shoes went for?"
And I said, "What shoes?" And he said,
"Those shoes."
And he was laughing. So I was like, "No, I don't know." So I got back home that night and I checked it out, because you couldn't just look something up on your phone like you can now. So I looked them up that night, and he sold the ugliest, most beat down pair of sneakers you could imagine. I think they were a pair of Reeboks. He ended up selling them for like $59. And it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but man, if you would have seen these shoes, you would have, even by today's standards, they weren't even like a pair of desirable vintage sneakers. They were just a pair of old, destroyed, beat down sneakers. And I sold them for $60. And he said,
there's a lot of shoes on there selling like that.
and I said, well, how'd you sell them? And I looked closer and I realized that he had them on his old nasty feet without socks on. So, basically, and you guys all know now the story, it's out, there are a lot of foot freaks out there. And, they basically, even back then, they wanted these old, stinky shoes that you put your funky, nasty toes in. They liked them. And the more stinky and funky they were, the more they paid for them. So momentarily, this guy, he continued to sell them that way. He would buy the ugliest shoes he could find, and he was selling them for $50 to $75 all day. He would pick up no less than $3 or $4, 4 pairs a day, and that's what he was selling them for. And, I admit, I got a little jealous, I guess you might say. But, personally, I have standards, and, I ain't going down that road. I'm not going to go into that sort of thing. I have to sleep at night. I'm a family man on top of that. So, I didn't do it. He did it for a while until eventually, it finally got to him and he quit doing it. But during that time, that's basically what opened the door for us to realize, because as he started doing that, he would notice in certain pairs in particular would go really well. And, that's basically where it was born. We would find, that certain shoes sold better than others. Certain shoes were more desirable. And, and then on top of that, we started picking up, after that, we started picking up, all the old sneakers and, finding out which ones were good and which ones were not so good. And we quickly realized that, all the Jordans, it didn't matter what condition they were in, they were going to sell. The Concords, the Olympic models. Back then, I don't think there were any Olympic models. But, there was all sorts of Jordans, and there was one key as far as to selling an old pair of Jordans back then. And the key to selling them was you had to put the right words, the right keywords. Back then, I called them hot words, because there was no such thing as keyword research. It was basically what I knew was certain words would sell things. And, if you didn't have the right words, then your items weren't going to sell, or they're going to sell for a fraction of what they should. But in particular, if you wanted to sell Jordans back then, you had to have these words in every title. And you had to have, of course, you had to have Nike Air Jordan. You had to have Max. You had to have all the Roman numerals 1 through like 10 or 11. Because there's the Jordan 1s, there's the Jordan 2s, there's the Jordan 3s, and you wanted to get all those audience because, people were searching for a particular, old Jordan, and if you had if you had all the Roman numerals, then you were going to get all that traffic. You guys know how that works. And I guess now they would consider that keyword spamming, but back then, it was called, there were no rules. It was the Wild West back then. You had to have Max, you had to have Jordan, you needed all the Roman numerals. You also needed OG for Original Gangster. Because back then, regular, your grandma and your father and the mailman weren't wearing, retro Jordans or retro anything. There was no such thing as retro anything. And you also needed, OG, you needed, and you needed Dunk. You always had to put Dunk. And I think that's probably still something they use. I'm not big in the sneaker game anymore. Once sort of the word got out as far as, for a couple of years there though, it was wide open. There was me, and there was just a handful of people in the entire planet that were selling shoes that way, and they were selling them on eBay. And, I was one of a few people, me and my homie, and, a few other people here and there. There was a few people on the East Coast. I'm sure there was some on the West Coast, but it was mainly people in California that had sort of caught wind of what we were doing, and, it started to grow from there. And, it's like, we sparked a flame, and, it went from, a niche, a subculture to an omnipresent culture. The whole world is on fire for, vintage and retro sneakers. And it goes before that. I'm not trying to take credit for, the whole, sneaker craze. Before I started selling them back in, 2002, 2001, 2000, the only sneakers that were hot were, sneakers were still hot. Obviously, they were the Jordans, they were Adidas. Those were the two hottest brands. And there was Reebok. There was some Reeboks. But back then, you could pick up a pair of Reebok Pumps, and we would find those semi-regularly. But even back then, the pumps were very, very rare. And to this day, I've only found a small handful of Reebok pumps in my entire thrifting career. And just a little quick history lesson. I mean, for those of you who don't know, sneakers were popularized. Sneakers were invented by Converse. They invented the original Converse All-Star. Then it was followed by the next sneaker that really took off were. That's right, guys. You all know Run DMC popularized Adidas. They started. I would say Run DMC started the whole culture of sneakers. Because once they started wearing them, that was it. Everybody had to have them. Your favorite rapper was wearing them, and back then it was an urban thing. It sure wasn't. Like I said, it wasn't the whole world. No one cared about sneakers. Like I said, Run DMC was wearing them, and most people didn't even listen to rap. There was no such thing as hip hop at the time. It was rap. Today we all know hip hop rules the world. Hip hop is everywhere. Following Adidas, was Michael Jordan. Then the Michael Jordan, the MJs came out, and that was it. It went Adidas, Michael Jordan, that was it. That was those guys who were wearing them back then, or were into them back then. Yours truly included. Those are the original sneakerheads. Now it's the trend, it's the fad, and it's not a trend. It's not. I wouldn't even go so far as to say it's a trend or a fad, because as we all know, sneakers, the whole culture is not going out. It's not going anywhere. It's just going to continue to grow. But that is where the original sneakers came from. MJ and Run DMC, and then from there, it was popularized by guys like me on eBay. And without eBay, there would be no sneaker culture, as far as I'm concerned. It wouldn't. It may have happened. It could have happened organically in some other way, but I just don't see it happening the way that it did, without eBay and without sellers like me.